Alright. The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. Here we are. Today we're rambling about Zelda. Specifically, the newest Zelda game. Maybe you've heard of it, Tears of the Kingdom. So, where to start? I think the best place to start actually is talking about Breath of the Wild. What did I think about Breath of the Wild? I love the world in that game. I think it's so exploring that game for the first time was so magical. You know, there was this honeymoon period with the game where it felt like the perfect video game. And so many of the parts came together, like the story, the combat, the puzzles. So many parts played into that, but I think the world was like the glue holding it together. That's what made people think like, yo, this might be like one of the best video games ever. I think the world played a large part in that. And just exploring it was so much fun. And I don't want to get into all of that, this is a Tears of the Kingdom video after all, but just want to kind of lay the groundwork before we talk about Tears of the Kingdom. So, needless to say, I love the world in Breath of the Wild. The story was great. It was kind of reserved. I think, gosh, what are some other Zelda games? Like Wind Waker, Twilight Princess. Those games have like long story sequences where you're like, okay, let me just sit down, let me pop some popcorn, just recline back and watch this cutscene. Hit A every time the text box finishes. Kind of like Metal Gear Solid 4. But gosh, yeah, the opening sequence of Twilight Princess, that takes forever. And that's not even like cutscenes, that's just like some cutscenes and some boring tutorial stuff. But Breath of the Wild wasted no time with that. Very minimal cutscenes, very minimal story elements. Most of like the narrative content in that game comes from you talking to people in the world. And so it's not like, okay, it's time to sit down and experience the story. It's like, okay, I go to this village and I explore and like, oh, there's a character there. What do they have to say? Oh, they're talking about the Sheikah tribe and their history, how they ended up in Kakariko or whatever. Of course, there were some cutscenes, and those were really cool. I think I really liked the cutscenes in Breath of the Wild, and I think I like them precisely because they held back so much. It made it much more meaningful when it finally happened, you know? And I guess to broaden out a bit, it was a great reboot of the series. Because what was the last Zelda game before Breath of the Wild? It couldn't have been Skyward Sword. Okay, so what was there? It was the Wii, the Wii U. Breath of the Wild came out on the Wii U. I guess Breath of the Wild was supposed to come out earlier, so it shouldn't have seemed like that big of a wait between. Well, it would have been Skyward Sword, yeah, and Breath of the Wild. But it kind of skipped through so much of the Wii U, it ended up becoming a launch title for the NX. Anyone remember the NX? Yeah, the Switch. But yeah, it was so weird. I haven't played Skyward Sword, but I know that game got a lot of shit for being just so handholdy. And there's so many. What's that one thing that was like perfectly emblematic of that game? Where every time you pick up a rupee, like a blue rupee or a red rupee, I don't know exactly, but anytime you pick up a rupee or whatever, Link does a little animation. It's like, hey, this is a rupee. Is a blue rupee. It's worth 5 rupees. And there's like a whole like Link showing it off, like whenever you get like a bow or a hook shot or something. But it's just like 5 rupees. And then whenever you'd get another one, it wouldn't play that animation. But when you restarted the game, it would play that animation again next time you picked up a blue rupee. So stuff like that for just wasting your time. I've heard that's a thing that Skyward Sword did a lot. It was just kind of long-winded with the story and all that. I'd like to play it one day. I don't want to be too dismissive of it, but I think that kind of people weren't so happy with that game. I think it got good reviews at first, but I think people kind of soured on it towards later on. And Breath of the Wild was just a complete U-turn from any of that stuff. Very minimal story. Very little of what, like, the traditional Zelda formula that was like established in, I guess, A Link to the Past. Even before Ocarina of Time, A Link to the Past really solidified what it was to be a Zelda game. And then Ocarina of Time iterated on that, of course. And then past that, it's like, okay, you gotta have the water temple, you gotta have the fire temple, gotta have the Gorons and Zora, gotta have those in every game. And even though Breath of the Wild still had those tropes, where, the Zora are still in it, the Gorons are still in it, there's Death Mountain, Great Fairies are still there to be found. Even though all that was still there, it felt very fresh. And it was cool to just see the little twists. See how the Zora are living in this world, what the Goron are up to. Despite all that praise, the game still did have its problems, had a fair share of parts that were just kind of annoying. And I guess that kind of leads into me talking about what I was hoping for when Tears of the Kingdom was announced. I guess whenever the first trailer came out and it showed Link and Zelda going into the beneath Hyrule Castle, I kind of solidified. Well, I guess in the text at the end literally said a sequel to Breath of the Wild is now in development. So I was like, oh, okay, this is gonna be Breath of the Wild 2. It's not like a Twilight Princess to Skyward Sword, where it's a completely random jump into another formula or art style, whatever. So it was very much going to iterate upon Breath of the Wild. So, when I learned that, what was I hoping for in the sequel? I wrote down 4 points. These aren't in any particular order, but I don't know. I just wanted to see more enemies. I feel like that was a big point that a lot of people talked about, and that was something I felt kind of too. Where Breath of the Wild felt like Bokoblins the game. Like, what were the enemy types in Breath of the Wild? Bokoblins, which kind of includes Moblins and Hinox, Lizalfos, Keese. Like, do Keese count as enemies? They just kind of poke at you. Choo-Choo. Yeah, I can't really think of him. Lionel. And then there's the bosses and all that, but there wasn't a lot of generic enemies to really flesh out the world. There were just so many Bokoblins. And what I wanted from Breath of the Wild 2 was just more enemies to find out in the world. And something else I kind of missed in Breath of the Wild from previous Zelda games. I just missed all the cool items. What was part of the Zelda formula was you go through a dungeon, you get some item halfway through. You get the slingshot. You're like, oh, the slingshot is just the thing I have now. And I can use it on stuff in the world. I can use it to hit enemies. It's got all these different purposes. And then you go on to another dungeon, and maybe it asks you to use that item again. And then you get another item in that dungeon, then another item in the next dungeon. And you just accumulate this huge arsenal of random stuff. Like, what is there? There's the bow, the hook shot, the hammer, iron boots. I guess now that I'm sitting down to think about them, I can't think of that many. Ball and chain from Twilight Princess. Like, would that be useful in Breath of the Wild? I don't know. I kind of want to see it, though. The hookshot. The hookshot's the coolest thing ever. Oh my god, I want the hookshot for Breath of the Wild. Well, spoilers, I know it's not in Tears of the Kingdom. Definitely want the hookshot in Tears of the Kingdom 2 or Breath of the Wild 3. I love the hookshot. I just want the hookshot. Gosh diggity darn it. Yeah, I just kind of missed that I didn't like that runes replaced items. I kind of respect what they did for the game and how they worked for Breath of the Wild, like, as it was. But I still kind of felt myself missing that, like, that rush of getting the hookshot or the fairy bow in Ocarina of Time or whatever game. And I think this is the biggest problem that most people had with Breath of the Wild, is that the dungeons sucked. I was really hoping Tears of the King, or I guess back then it was just the sequel to Breath of the Wild. I was hoping the sequel to Breath of the Wild would have better dungeons. Because dungeons in that game, I guess they were okay for what they were. They had some cool mechanics where you're in the Divine Beast, and you get controls where you're like, okay, I'm in this what was it? The Rito Temple, for example. You know, you're in this giant divine beast, and the dungeon is that beast, and you gotta walk around it. And you can control it by tilting it. So for like the bird, you can tilt it left or right. So if, how do I describe this? I don't need to describe it. You guys have played Breath of the Wild. But you can control how the divine beast is like oriented, and it's kind of like older Zelda dungeons where there's like some weird mechanic that changes how you see the environment. And I guess they were cool in that way, but the visual design just sucked. It was so, you know, it was cool. Starting out, it was cool seeing the Sheikah design of the, my gosh, I talked about it in the Breath of the Wild tour, but the inspiration from the Dramon period. It was cool seeing those swirls everywhere of the Sheikah, but by God, I got so bored of seeing that by the end of the game with, like, you see it in the shrines, you see it in the dungeons, you see it everywhere, and it kind of sucked seeing it in the dungeons because dungeons in previous Zelda games, it was like an insight into the culture that had built that building or temple or area. So like the water temple, that had such a specific feel. And the fire temple, that was just the vibes of the fire temple in Ocarina of Time is so cool. And even the first one, the Great Deku Tree, that has such great theming of like there's this tree who's like who's been in Link's village ever since he came to Kokiri Forest. And he's in danger and you need to go inside him and help him. And you look around, you see the bark of like the tree around you, and there's all kinds of creepy crawlies all over the place. It was just such good theming. Every area felt distinct. And pretty much every Zelda game, every Zelda dungeon. And in Breath of the Wild, they really dropped the ball. Almost all looked the same. You know, the mechanics can be as cool as they are, but if it feels the same, just through aesthetics alone, then I think that really stuck with people. That was kind of a big hump to get over. So that was something I was really hoping for. I guess dungeons were okay in the base game, but I just distinctly wanted, like, each temple or dungeon to have their own visual style. So my final little point for this section, and then we'll start talking about Tears of the Kingdom finally, but I just wanted more to do. So like I said earlier, I really liked the world of Breath of the Wild, but it felt kind of empty in places. Now, I did say in my Breath of the Wild tour that, like, the emptiness kind of plays into the point of the game, where, like, gosh, the original Legend of Zelda for the NES, that, like, had a lot of screens that didn't really do anything. It was just, like, it was just filler, and it's like, yeah, a big world is gonna have empty space. Not every little pixel has to have purpose. And when you kind of expand that from a 2D plane from like the NES to a 3D world that you explore, you know, you can turn the camera around and look every direction in Breath of the Wild. You know, that's a world like that needs emptiness to feel real. You know, you can't have distractions every which way you look. It feels like artificial. It feels like it's designed to be played in. But Breath of the Wild, you know, despite being a video game, it has a lot of empty space. And it feels real because of that. But also, it felt a little too empty. You know, it was cool going around looking for shrines. Like, what else was there to do in Breath of the Wild but look for shrines? I wasn't excited to go look for chests in the world, or go kill enemy camps for materials or anything like that. I didn't really want to do that. I just wanted to get shrines, do the quests, finish the main story. And even past that, you know, it's just exploring on its own is fun, but just the surface felt bland. I guess not necessarily bland, I just wanted more. I felt like there could be more to Breath of the Wild. It felt like a good first draft. And I was excited to see what they would do for the sequel. Speaking of the sequel, Tears of the Kingdom, have you heard of that? It's the sequel to Breath of the Wild. They made it and it came out recently. And I'm going to talk about it. So, my pros. Pros for Tears of the Kingdom. I guess, before we get into that, I finished Tears of the Kingdom gosh, a couple days ago. Was it yesterday, actually? I think it might have been. I rolled credits on the game. I put maybe like 50, 60 hours into it. So, what are my pros for the game? What did I like about it? So, I was just talking about the world and how I was hoping Tears of the Kingdom would give you more to do. And lo and behold, it gave you a lot to do. The world is a lot more fleshed out in Tears of the Kingdom. The first thing I have to talk about, first thing that has to be talked about is the sky. That was a huge draw for the earlier trailers where they were showing Link, diving from the sky onto the Hyrule. But you see him diving down, you're like, wait, no, what's up in the sky? It was like Sky Islands? Just adding that layer to Hyrule where there's like, okay, here's the base, ground level. This is what you explored in Breath of the Wild. It's not exactly the same, but, it's still the same landscape. There's Dueling Peaks, there's Death Mountain, there's the Hebra Mountains. You know where everything is. But on top of that, you have the sky where it's like, oh, there's the Great Sky Islands. There's insert other island there. Might have something else to say about the sky in one of the next sections, but the game starting out on the sky felt so cool. And gosh, the depths. That was something I didn't even know about pre-release. I stopped watching trailers at some point, partly because I don't really like to watch trailers for games I know I'm gonna play. Like Final Fantasy 16. I know I'm gonna play that. So I'm not gonna watch any trailers for it. I don't need to see the stuff that I'm gonna play myself and get spoiled for it. Tears of the Kingdom, I don't know if I said earlier, I'm pretty sure I did, but just to reiterate, I wasn't too excited for it pre-release, but I knew I was gonna play it. And so I just stopped watching the trailers. And they started showing off the depths in some of the later trailers, but I didn't watch those. I didn't know about the depths. I didn't know that was a thing. So gosh, what do? I fly down to the Hyrule from the Sky Islands, and before I even go get a paraglider, I'm just walking around looking for... just exploring, and I see this chasm. I'm like, what is that? I'm like, do I jump in? I was too scared to jump in. But, so I just kind of avoided it, went and did my own thing. And eventually I came back with a paraglider, either to that chasm or another one. And I just jumped down, and I looked around after I hit the floor, and I'm like, oh my god. This is an entire underground area beneath Hyrule. Like, the Sky Islands are... it's like dotted throughout, it's not like an entire sky continent above it. It's like little islands dotted about. But the depths, it's like literally an entire layer underneath Hyrule. And admittedly, there's not a lot to do. It's kind of like Breath of the Wild in that it's just kind of empty. There's some enemy camps to go for and some the shrine equivalent to go after. But, there's not like settlements or anything to discover. But just the sheer fact that there's more. There's a whole other layer to discover and explore on top of the first layer. And then, a little bit in the sky layer. That's crazy. Hyrule felt so much more fleshed out in this. And also regarding the world, they added wells and caves. I think I saw somebody tweet about this, or maybe I saw it on Reddit, but somebody mentioned I can't believe they added caves into Tears of the Kingdom. I was like, wait a minute. Were there no caves in Breath of the Wild? And I'm trying to think, there may be like one-offs. Like in Death Mountain or something with the Gorons. But were there no caves in Breath of the Wild? That just sounds crazy. Like, caves are such like a fundamental open world thing. Like Skyrim, there's caves everywhere. Every game, every open world game, there's caves. I don't know, maybe I guess there's not caves in Breath of the Wild. I can't think of them. At least not to the extent that there are in Tears of the Kingdom. But yeah, they're just like, hey, let's just add caves into the world. And they did, and it feels so cool. It's like a little mini dungeon. You get to it, and I guess there's no puzzles or anything, but it's exciting to just see a cave. And you go in, there's going to be a chest somewhere, or a bubble frog, so you can unlock whatever later down the line. Those additions they added, what is it? The sky, the depths, and caves on the surface. All three of those gave the base game of... Those were just added on top of the world from Breath of the Wild. And it gave it so much more depth. Yeah, I'll just leave it at that. The world is great in Tears of the Kingdom. I love it. You know, that's all about the new stuff they added in the world. But the old stuff that was in Breath of the Wild, it's so cool to explore locations and just see how they've changed. It's just cool. It's cool to see Kakariko, how they've changed in the... I think I saw someone did the math based on how the kids aged up. And I think there's maybe like 3 to 5 years between Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. That's a lot of time for just things to happen in someone's life and for them to change, or things to happen in the world. And it's so cool to see what Kakariko's up to, what Hateno's up to, Lurelin Village, all the different regions with like the Gorons and the Zora and the Rito and the Gerudo. There's so many places to find and just see what they've been up to. And I didn't expect to like that about this game, but I did. The new abilities. I don't know if I expected them to ditch the runes from the first game, but the ones they added into this, Fuse, Ascend, Rewind, and Ultra Hand, they're just so brilliant. Like, I can't imagine going back to play Breath of the Wild without these. It would feel so weird. I guess it wouldn't feel too weird because these are kind of, with Fuse being like the only outlier, but like Ascend, Rewind, Ultra Hand, you know, those are all built into like the level design of Tears of the Kingdom's Hyrule. I guess in a way, you know, like the things you can build with Ultra Hand and being able to rewind enemy projectiles at enemies, you know, stuff like that just kind of, it just changes how you see the world. And they're so fundamental, like, abilities. You know, I did complain earlier about the, not having the hook shot or stuff like that in Breath of the Wild, but things like Fuse and Rewind, Ultra Hand, these are a lot more, like, fundamental. They have so much more potential to be used, like, situations to be used in. Like, with the hook shot, what are you gonna do? You're gonna hook to a... You're gonna point it at a mountain across from you and just hook to it? Like, that's cool, but... Ultra Hand, what are you gonna do? You're gonna build a bridge? Or are you gonna build, like, a giant walking machine? You're gonna build a flying machine? Yeah. There's just so much more you can do with Tears of the Kingdom's abilities. And it further iterated upon Breath of the Wild's player freedom. The story... I expected to like the story. You know, I'm a sucker for story in Zelda games. I think it's so cool seeing Link and Zelda and all them interact. And I think the developments in this game were really cool. Gosh, I was really missing Ganondorf in Breath of the Wild. I'm so glad they brought him back for this. I was not a fan of Calamity Ganon as a boss. I really liked, like, the cloud looming over Hyrule Castle where it's, like, swirling about. The, like, the serpent thing. But then you go into... What is it? You go into the throne room, and then you fight this... I don't even remember how you just... It's like some construct thing. Like Sheikah technology. Yeah, I didn't like that. And Pig Ganon at the end was kind of cool, but... Ganondorf is a character, where Calamity Ganon isn't. Ganondorf's just so cool, my god. He's such a cool villain. I'm so glad they brought him back. He had so much to do in this. It was... Oh my gosh. Oh, I love Ganondorf so much. Just seeing the Zonai, seeing what all that was about in Breath of the Wild. Like, I probably would have guessed the Zonai would come up in a sequel to Breath of the Wild, or even a sequel to the game after that, but I think they handled the Zonai pretty well. Like, you saw little hints of them in Breath of the Wild, and they probably didn't even have all that stuff planned out, but the way they spun it in this game is so cool. And it kind of makes sense with how it worked in that game. Talked earlier about the enemy variety in Breath of the Wild, and there are more enemies in Tears of the Kingdom. Maybe not as much as I'd like. There's still a lot of Bokoblins and Lizalfos, and I feel like there's one more major enemy type that I can't remember. Moblins don't count. But yeah, there's just so many bokoblins. I don't want to see any more bokoblins. I mean, they're cool that they're expressive and all that, but well, regardless, there are more enemies in this game. You know, you got boss bokoblins, which are like big guys, and they're kind of walking with their friends sometimes. That's cute. What else is there? Gibdos and the Gerudo. I guess the bosses from each temple. Those are so much cooler than the bosses from the previous game. Oh, well, I guess we'll talk about the dungeons now. So the dungeon bosses are so much better than the Blighted Ganons, whatever you'd call them. Those were so boring. And in this, it's like themed enemies specific for that area. So you go into the Wind Temple, you're like, oh, that's a guy you'd fight in the Wind Temple. Or you go in the Fire Temple, you're like, oh, that's a fire guy, sure. So much better than like the Sheikah technology beasts from the Breath of the Wild. And the dungeons themselves were better too. You know, I think they really listened to the criticism of like the theming not being good for the divine beasts in Breath of the Wild. They were themed in this game. You go to the... Do I want to spoil... I won't spoil it. But just know that each region has their own specific temple. And exploring them was fun. So that's the pros. You know, there's probably a bunch of others I'm not thinking of that I liked but didn't really realize. But before we go into the cons, I just want to kind of talk about stuff I'm neutral on. The new dungeon rewards. Whenever you beat the dungeon in Breath of the Wild, you get a power from the, what do they even call them? Not the sages. Like the main character who helped you out, so some Rito guy helped you. Forgetting everything for Breath of the Wild. Was it Teba? Or no, Revali. Revali was the person that, was the guardian or whatever of the Divine Beast. And whenever you beat that Divine Beast, you can fly up into the air. He gives you that ability. Those were like the rewards for beating dungeons. Where in previous Zelda games, it was like, oh, you do this dungeon, you get the hook shot, you get the bow, you get the iron boots. But in this game, you got powers in Breath of the Wild. And I guess that's cool. Some of them are okay. Like, Revali's Gale, that was S tier. For being able to glide places, go up into the air and get some height. I can't remember any of the other. Okay, so there was the Goron Shield. There was the spin attack for the Gerudo, and Mipha's Blessing. I gave you an extra life when you got killed. So those are cool. I like those. Kinda. The dungeon rewards in this game, I don't think are as good. So what is... Do I want to say them? No, I won't say them. I don't think they were as satisfying. They weren't as useful as the ones from the previous game. And I'll leave it at that. If you played, you know what I'm talking about. Yeah. Or maybe I'm out of the... Maybe one everyone else really likes it, so I don't know. I didn't really like them that much. I guess this isn't even really a point, it's just kind of like a comment. I'm curious what you guys think about this. I don't really hate the weapon durability. I feel like some people... I've seen some comments online or on Twitter or Reddit or whatever where people like, you know, I kind of liked Breath of the Wild, but I really, really hated weapon durability. And I guess it's annoying at points, but I don't hate it. Like, it's not enough to really tank my opinion of the game. And, you know, it's still in this game. And they kind of did mitigate it with Fuse and how you can add, like, monster parts to weapons to make them more powerful. So you go kill a silver bokoblin and you'll get a super damaging part that you can add to any sword. Which kind of, I guess, fixes the point of Breath of the Wild there was this, like, criticism where there's no real reason to go clear enemy camps because you're just wasting weapons. But in this game, you know, you can go clear an enemy camp and maybe you'll waste a weapon or two, but you'll get some good rewards. You know, you'll get a powerful thing you can throw on a weapon. And if you can swing it so, you know, maybe you waste one weapon on an enemy camp or half a weapon, that's probably more realistic, waste half a weapon's durability to get one super powerful part that you can fuse to a sword, you know, you come out ahead in that way. So they kind of fixed the weapon durability thing with Fuse, but weapons still break. And people are still going to rag on this game because of it, but I don't hate it. They'd have to fundamentally change the combat, I think, if weapon durability wasn't a thing. Because why would else would... There wouldn't be like 50 billion swords everywhere if no sword broke. Yeah, it'd look completely different. I don't know what it would look like. But I think weapon durability and the system as it is and Tears of the Kingdom is fine. Alright. I don't mean to be a negative Nancy, but I have some cons. I really do like Tears of the Kingdom, but there were just some things that some little things that kind of annoyed me. Number one, I kind of alluded to this earlier, but I don't think there's enough sky areas. I was really expecting a lot more with how much the trailers leaned into, like, Link's in the sky, and he's got these cool abilities, and he's walking around in these Zonite regions. I expected more out of the sky. Like, gosh, once I left, like, the tutorial, what is it, the Great Sky Islands? Once I left, I rarely came back to the sky. Like, I guess I have to go back now for a quest that, like, there's, like, little sky islands you gotta go to all across the world. Guess I'll do some exploring of those now. But, yeah, I wish there was more. I wish there was more to see, because I really like the aesthetic of the Great Sky Island, and I wish there was just more chunks of, like, sky islands rather than just, here's a sky island. Oh no, here's, like, some sky islands together. I wish there were more of those. Something I thought was weird is that this game kind of felt more hand-holdy than Breath of the Wild. That was something I kind of arrived at early on, but when it came time to write examples for it for my notes here, I kind of had a hard time thinking of examples. I wish I could remember what gave me reason for thinking that it felt more hand-holdy. Maybe there were more cutscenes. The one thing that definitely annoyed me was that there were shrines for tutorials. Shrines that teach you about stealth or whatever. Where I don't think there were any tutorials in Breath of the Wild for that, were there? Were there any shrines that told you about stealth? And the game freezes you in place and it's like, look, you gotta press L. You gotta press down on the left stick to crouch. And sneak up behind an enemy and press the Y button. Was that in the game? I don't know. I don't think it was. I think there were points where it would pop on screen. It's like, hey, you can sneak up on an enemy. But it's really annoying when the game grinds you to a halt. And there was like 5 shrines where it's like, heed my words. The words slowly fade in. Heed my words. This enemy can only be defeated by shooting him in the head with an arrow. Slowly fades out. Slowly fades in. Try it. Slowly fades out. Oh, it took forever. There was like 5 or 6 of those that did that. That just felt so clunky compared to what Breath of the Wild is. You know, just pop up a little thing on screen and say, hey, this is how you can stealth kill an enemy. Press minus to learn more. Yeah. Dungeons? You know, I kind of hate to say it, but dungeons are still kind of underwhelming. You know, it feels weird to complain about some element in the Zelda game being formulaic. But dungeons felt pretty formulaic in this game. Every single one is... Yeah, every single one was like, okay, you walk into the dungeon, there's a main room, you interact with a thing, and then something's supposed to happen, but it doesn't. And then whoever's with you is like, oh, we need to go activate these 5 things, so we can then activate the main thing. And then when you activate the main thing, the boss comes. It's just formulaic. You know, once you do the first dungeon, and then you see it happen again in the second dungeon, you're like, oh, this is going to keep happening, isn't it? What do I think about the dungeon aesthetic? I think they did an okay job. I'm trying to think of the dungeons in my mind, see if I have any problems with them. I think it just comes down to that formulaic bit of them being too similar in terms of mechanics. Well, in terms of go do this 5 times, and then you can fight the boss. That was more annoying than anything. Also related to the dungeons was this It's kind of a weird complaint, but I guess it's like a problem of the game itself, of the format of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, where you could go anywhere and do anything at any time. You can fight any temple in any order you want. So each temple, whenever you beat the boss, there's a cutscene that plays. And the cutscene is pretty much exactly the same for every temple. Now it's a little bit different, because in the Fire Temple, there's some Goron talking. And in the Wind Temple, there's a Rito talking. And there's kind of a little bit of character for, like, how they're speaking to you. But it still tells the exact same facts. It's information they want the player to know. So it would make sense to see it on your first try. But why have this there every single time you beat a dungeon? It's literally telling you the exact same story each time. I was honestly expecting them to have okay, here's the cutscene. You see this. And then I saw it the second time, I was like, wait a second. I'm seeing this again? Or I guess I was hoping they would have done a thing where it's like, okay, there's the cutscene, and then the second dungeon you beat, it's like a much more condensed version. Or it's not even there. Maybe the character says some random dialogue unrelated to that. But yeah, just each cutscene was like, gosh, it must have been 2 minutes after you beat each dungeon. It's just the same thing pretty much, just in a different wrapper. That was annoying. Those are all kind of nitpicks. Not really nitpicks, but just minor quibbles. But this thing right here, this is an actual negative to the game. This is something I would actually that actually makes me mad about this game. An actual true con. Managing followers sucks. So in Breath of the Wild, where when you beat a dungeon, like I said earlier, you'd get powers. You get Revali's Gale or Mipha's Blessing. These are things you could trigger under certain circumstances. So Revali's Gale, this is a thing you could trigger by jumping. You press the X button and hold it down. So Link will do a little hop and then he'll crouch on the ground. And you can see the wind kind of go around his feet. And okay, I can use Revali's Gale. And when you let go of X, Link flies up into the air and that uses Revali's Gale. Or Mipha's Blessing. When you die, it uses Mipha's Blessing and you get brought back. It's not a thing you have to trigger. What else is there? To trigger the Gerudo power, you just have to hold a spin attack. And Urbosa will do some lightning thing. What was the last thing? The Goron. He would just do a parry for you whenever you're holding your shield out, so you wouldn't have to... You just get a free parry every now and then. Those are things you could trigger through normal actions. So, you just hold down the jump button and then you fly up in the air. Or you do a spin attack, and that trigger, it augments your existing abilities. In Tears of the Kingdom, they don't do that. Instead, it's just characters following you around. Zora guy following me, he's with me all the time. And to use his ability, I have to talk to him. Now, not necessarily a whole dialogue tree thing, but I just have to walk up to him and press A. And that gives you a little shield. Now sure, that might not sound so bad. If you just got the Zora guy coming with you and you want to, get a shield, that's cool. You walk up to him, press A, you got a shield. But what does that look like when you have 4 characters roaming around you? When there's 50 billion not 50 billion, but when you get all the followers you can, it's it's a tiny crowd around you, and you're okay, I want to activate the Goron ability. So, okay, just get out of my way, guys. I gotta talk to the Goron. But everyone's shuffling around, and it's so hard to talk to one specific character. And it's so much less of an elegant solution than what was in Breath of the Wild. I guess the only cool upside is that you have these people to fight with you in combat. So you don't have to use the Zora ability if you don't want to. He can just hang out with you and poke people with his spears. But if you specifically want to use the Zora shield ability, yeah, it's awful. That's one of the things in this game I would say is awful. It feels weird because this feels like something you would see in the original game. And Breath of the Wild's, system of having these contextual activations. That seems like the smart evolution of this. Feels like they regressed. Yeah, that's bizarre. I don't know if they're going to do a Breath of the Wild 3, but I have a feeling if they're going to stick with this path, I hope they figure out something better than whatever they went through with this. I do like having them, fighting with me. That's really cool having these, like, permanent followers. But when you need to trigger the abilities, and you can't because they're walking around and you can't talk to the right person, sucks. So, with all that out of the way, Tears of the Kingdom's a great game. You don't need me to say that. But the question at hand, the question I think most people are curious about, is that is Tears of the Kingdom better than Breath of the Wild? I've had a lot of time to think about this. Not just even since beating the game's story mode, but, even like 20 hours in. That's something I've been thinking about. It's like, gosh, is this a better game? Is this more enjoyable than Breath of the Wild? What is there? Is there more stuff to find in the world in Tears of the Kingdom? Like, what did I say earlier? There's the sky, the depths, there's caves. There's so much more to find. There's so many more, like, collectibles, like little currencies for things to get so you can buy, like, costumes or weapons or whatever from. Like, more than just rupees. More enemy types. More story. Tears of the Kingdom is just more Breath of the Wild, but more. Man, it's hard to judge a game like that. These games are in such a unique position. I guess it just comes down to Breath of the Wild was such a weird game. We didn't know what to expect going into Breath of the Wild. Breath of the Wild was such like a... It blew everyone's minds at the time. Like, it was so hard to think of this like a game. It just felt like a cultural thing. And trying to go back now and think about like, well, Breath of the Wild was a game. It wasn't just like an experience, it was a product. It was $60. Is Tears of the Kingdom a more enjoyable experience? We didn't know what to expect going into Breath of the Wild, and Tears of the Kingdom, in the lead up to this game, it was advertised as a sequel to Breath of the Wild. So when you see that, it's like, okay, a sequel to Breath of the Wild. I have a frame of reference for this. I know what Breath of the Wild is. But Breath of the Wild, going into that, we didn't have a reference for that. And so, going from like no reference to Breath of the Wild, that was such like a huge jump, such an experience. Just exploring everywhere, it was so magical. And Tears of the Kingdom, it builds upon that. It is, in all but name, Breath of the Wild 2. So it's hard to... Is what I'm saying making sense? I feel like I'm kind of looping here, but they're just fundamental different. I can't separate Breath of the Wild from being that weird game that we didn't know. It was like a completely new direction for the series. We had no understanding of what it was going to be like when it happened. But Tears of the Kingdom, we knew what to expect mostly. Yeah, so it feels weird to say yes, Tears of the Kingdom is better than Breath of the Wild. But man, I think I like Tears of the Kingdom more. I think it's a more enjoyable game. There's so much more to do. Like, Breath of the Wild was so much fun because of the stuff you could do in it. Because you could explore the world and find shrines and find quests. That was why Breath of the Wild was fun. And Tears of the Kingdom has more of that. And the quality didn't go down either. Like, they increased the quantity. It might have increased the quality. That's hard to say. Gosh, I don't know. Do I like the story more? Like, I think I like playing Tears of the Kingdom more. Do I like the story more? I kind of like the simplicity of Breath of the Wild more. I think that was such a strong hook. This is something I'd have to really sit on for like a year. Where Breath of the Wild, that was... Like, you start the game waking up as Link. And you wake up and you're like, oh my god, I've been asleep for 100 years? All this shit's gone down? Zelda's in fighting Calamity Ganon and I gotta summon all these people to help me out? I think the hook is better for Breath of the Wild. Tears of the Kingdom story, man. I didn't expect to have to think about this, but yeah, Tears of the Kingdom story is a little bit less striking. Yeah. There's a lot more going on in the story. That's not necessarily a bad thing. I think they handled it really well what was in the story. And like I said, I really love Ganondorf in this game. But Calamity Ganon in the first game, even though the boss fight at the end sucked, that was such a cool, looming threat. Gosh, it's hard to... I've already said it, but it's hard to think about Breath of the Wild as more than just like a... Breath of the Wild isn't just like a one-off game now. It's part of a series. You know, it is... When it came out, it was effectively Breath of the Wild, but now it's game 1 of game 2 in this Breath of the Wild series. I don't even know what you'd call it, the Wilds? What have they dubbed this era of Zelda? Yeah, I don't know. Breath of the Wild as a standalone game was really cool. But now thinking about it in context of Tears of the Kingdom, I don't know what to make of it. I think I can say for sure that Tears of the Kingdom is more enjoyable. And I'm not 100% sure on how I feel about the story. What do you think about Tears of the Kingdom? Or anything I've had to say? Do you have any special thoughts? Anything you want to yell at me about? Maybe you really like the dungeons in this game. Maybe you really hate weapon durability. Let me know, and I'll tell you how wrong you are. Thanks for watching. Leave a comment for a future episode of one of these. You know, as always, I don't just want to talk about video games. I'll talk about all kinds of random stuff, but anything else? No, that's it. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.